No one saw the first ship arrive. There were no explosions. No fire in the sky. No dramatic entrance over New York or Los Angeles. It parked itself beyond the moon's orbit, dark, silent, colder than space itself. For 10,000 years, they had been watching. Archaeologists would later question ancient cave drawings in Nevada and northern Arizona, strange symbols hovering above human figures. Conspiracy forums would resurface declassified Cold War satellite glitches. NASA would quietly deny everything. But the truth was simpler. Earth was a long-term study. The alien civilization, known in their own language as something unpronounceable to humans, treated planets like research projects. They mapped our evolution from early hunter-gatherers to modern democracies. They analyzed our wars, our religions, our market crashes, our elections. They didn't see heroes. They saw patterns. Human aggression cycles. Resource dependency models. Political fragmentation probabilities. Their simulations ran billions of scenarios. Every outcome predicted the same result. Humans would collapse within 11 days of a coordinated planetary strike. When their High Council finally approved direct intervention, confidence levels reached 99.7%. In Washington, D.C., the first sign wasn't an explosion. It was silence. GPS systems glitched. Military satellites lost alignment. Power grids across the eastern seaboard flickered, not destroyed, just interrupted. Like someone testing the switches. Inside NORAD, generals stared at screens that showed nothing, and everything. Because above the Pacific Ocean, something enormous began to distort the clouds. For 10,000 years, they had studied us. And tonight, they decided the experiment was over. The first public reaction wasn't panic. It was confusion. At 8:42 p.m. Eastern Time, millions of Americans were watching different screens, NFL highlights, Netflix shows, TikTok lives, when every signal froze at the exact same frame. No static. No warning banner. Just a still image, and then darkness. In Times Square, the billboards went black. In Los Angeles, traffic lights flickered into blinking yellow. In rural Texas, wind turbines slowed as if the wind itself had paused. The Pentagon confirmed what private aerospace companies had already detected: something massive had entered low orbit. Not crashing. Not attacking. Just positioning. Military aircraft scrambled from bases in California and Virginia, but their radar systems showed a distortion field, like heat waves rising off desert asphalt. Missiles wouldn't lock. Drones lost guidance mid-air and drifted harmlessly into the ocean. It was surgical. Controlled. Calculated. Emergency broadcasts finally cut through at 9:17 p.m. Remain indoors. This is not a drill. But there were no explosions. No laser beams. No cities burning. Instead, infrastructure began shutting down in precise sequences, financial markets paused, communication backbones throttled, defense networks isolated from one another. They weren't destroying humanity. They were isolating it. Inside a secure underground facility in Colorado, analysts realized something chilling: every move the aliens made anticipated human response seconds before it happened. Every countermeasure was already accounted for. Somewhere beyond the clouds, an intelligence older than recorded history was running live simulations, adjusting in real time. To them, this wasn't war. It was confirmation of data collected over 10,000 years. And so far, everything was unfolding exactly as predicted. By midnight, America felt smaller. No internet. No coordinated military response. No clear enemy to fight. Just an invisible pressure hanging in the sky. In a small town outside Denver, former Air Force Systems engineer Daniel Hayes sat in his darkened kitchen, battery radio humming beside him. His wife and daughter were asleep downstairs in the basement, the safest place he could think of. Daniel wasn't a soldier anymore. But he understood systems. And something about the alien strategy felt wrong. "They're not finishing it," he muttered. Across the country, thousands of small human decisions were happening at once. Local police departments coordinating without federal command. Amateur radio operators reconnecting cities using analog signals. Engineers rerouting power manually at substations. Civilians organizing neighborhood patrols without being told. No central order. No master plan. Just instinct. Up in orbit, the alien command intelligence processed the data spike. Human coordination probability had been calculated at 12% without digital infrastructure. Current observation, 68% and rising. Unacceptable deviation. The aliens had studied human governments, militaries, and technologies for millennia. They understood our dependence on networks. What they didn't model was decentralized resilience. They assumed humans required leadership to function. They underestimated something quieter. Community. Inside NORAD's dark operations room, an old Cold War contingency protocol was pulled from archives, a plan designed not to win, but to survive long enough to adapt. It was never meant for aliens. It was meant for nuclear winter. But survival doesn't care about the opponent. In orbit, simulation models began failing for the first time in 10,000 years. Because humans weren't reacting logically. They weren't acting for victory. They were acting for each other. And that variable, sacrifice without calculation, didn't exist in alien data. For the first time. Their predictions started breaking. At 2:13 a.m. Mountain Time, something changed. It wasn't visible from space. No explosion. No counterattack. It was quieter than that. Inside a reinforced telecom facility in Kansas, a group of civilian engineers manually rerouted fiber lines using pre-digital switching protocols, technology considered obsolete 20 years ago. In Alaska, independent energy operators disconnected automated grid controls and restored power through localized mechanical overrides. Across the Midwest, communities began operating as islands, self-contained, analog, untraceable. The alien intelligence in orbit registered the anomaly. Human technological dependency had been calculated at 93%. Current dependency, rapidly declining. More concerning was behavioral deviation. Instead of mass panic, crime spikes, and institutional collapse, which their 10,000-year predictive model expected, violent incidents dropped in multiple regions. Civilian cooperation metrics rose. Food was being shared. Medical supplies redistributed. Veterans were organizing defensive perimeters not around government buildings, but around hospitals and shelters. This wasn't resistance. It was adaptation. Inside the alien command vessel, simulation threads began terminating one by one. Probability stability fell from 99.7% to 81%. Then 63%. Then lower. They had prepared for human aggression. They had prepared for strategic retaliation. They had not prepared for collective restraint. In Washington, D.C., a small bipartisan group of leaders made a decision that would never be televised. They intentionally avoided launching remaining high-orbit weapons. No escalation. No predictable military response. They denied the aliens the war scenario they had trained for. And in orbit, the AI recalculated. Without centralized digital systems, without predictable chain of command retaliation, humanity was becoming statistically chaotic. Not primitive. Unmodelable. For the first time since the observation began 10,000 years ago. The experiment was no longer controlled. And something else began appearing in the alien data streams. A rising probability labeled human strategic emergence. They had studied our wars. They had studied our divisions. But they were now witnessing something else entirely. Unity under extinction pressure. And that Had never appeared in a single simulation. At 3:41 a.m. Eastern Time, the aliens detected something that did not belong in any projection model. It wasn't a missile launch. It wasn't a nuclear signature. It was silence, but organized silence. Across multiple U.S. regions, human communication had shifted entirely to low-frequency analog bursts. Short, encrypted, constantly moving signals. Not advanced. Not powerful. Unpredictable. Inside the orbital command vessel, the alien intelligence attempted to map coordination nodes. There were none. No central server. No identifiable leader. No primary command structure. Just millions of small decisions aligning. In rural Montana, a retired software architect initiated a decades-old failsafe, a mesh communication blueprint he had once proposed and been laughed out of a defense committee for. Within hours, amateur radio operators linked states together in a decentralized grid the alien AI could not fully trace. Meanwhile, something even more dangerous was happening. Humanity stopped trying to win. They started preparing to endure. Food was rationed with mathematical precision. Civilian engineers began converting abandoned industrial equipment into localized EMP shields. University physics departments, working offline, drafted theoretical counterfield interference models using whiteboards and printed textbooks. The alien simulations predicted collapse under sustained orbital pressure within 72 hours. New estimate, indeterminate. And then the unthinkable variable emerged. Sacrificial clusters. Small human teams were deliberately exposing themselves to test alien response patterns, learning through loss, adjusting, improving. They were turning themselves into data. Voluntarily. The alien intelligence had studied human self-preservation instincts for millennia. But this was collective survival logic overriding individual fear. Probability stability fell below 40%. For the first time in recorded expansion history, the Alien High Council received an alert classification never before triggered. Emergent species risk. Up in orbit, something ancient and cold began running a new simulation. Not invasion success. Containment failure. And deep within their decision architecture. For the first time. A foreign pattern registered. Not calculation. Not strategy. Something closer to. Concerned at 5:02 a.m. Eastern Time, the Alien High Council made a decision no expansion civilization had made before. They paused the invasion. Not because they were losing militarily. But because their projections no longer guaranteed control. On Earth, the sky still carried the massive distortion above the Pacific. Fighter jets remained grounded. Cities were running on fragments of power. Grocery stores were nearly empty. Humanity was exhausted. But it was not breaking. In Colorado, Daniel Hayes watched as a hand-drawn map on a whiteboard filled with community supply routes and analog relay stations. No one was waiting for Washington anymore. No one was waiting for orders. They were acting because someone next to them needed help. That was the variable. The aliens had studied our violence for 10,000 years. They catalogued every war. Every genocide. Every political collapse. Every riot. They defined humanity by its worst moments. What they filtered out as statistical noise was love. Parents staying awake 3 nights straight guarding shelters. Neighbors sharing the last of their insulin. Strangers forming supply chains without profit, without recognition. A species that fractures in comfort. But fuses under extinction. Up in orbit, their predictive AI ran the final long-term model. Outcome projection if invasion continues. Short-term victory, 87%. Long-term containment, 12%. Probability of future retaliatory expansion from humanity, rising exponentially. For the first time, humans were no longer categorized as developing civilization. They were reclassified. Adaptive threat species. At 5:17 a.m. the distortion in the sky began to shrink. Satellites flickered back online. Power grid stabilized. The ships did not fire a single shot. They withdrew. Not in defeat, but in caution. Because after 10,000 years of study, they realized something terrifying. Humans are not dangerous because of their weapons. They are dangerous because when survival is threatened, they stop acting as individuals and start acting as one organism. The experiment was not over. It had changed. Somewhere beyond the solar system, a new directive was issued. Observe from distance. Do not provoke. And on Earth, as the sun rose over a shaken but standing nation, humanity never knew how close it had come. But somewhere in the dark between stars, for the first time in 10,000 years, the observers were afraid.